Boker Tov. Every day is the same now, except Shabbat. These words were said by one of my congregants one Shabbat morning, just after the Zoom meeting opened. He was elderly. He was alone. He was right. What about Shabbat gave him this feeling? Not long ago, he might have said it was because he had come to temple. That was BCE, before the Corona era. How can Shabbat be different when we can't go anywhere different? We are living in difficult times in so many ways. For those contending with standard COVID concerns, not the stark emergencies of first responders and victims, but the everyday grind of life in the time of COVID, the days are too often silently smothered by sameness, doing the same things at the same screen, the same desk, making forays to the same places, then immediately heading home, seeing only the same small bubble of people, if that, fighting inertia to schedule video chats with others beyond. This perpetual sameness may suffice for the desk and the screen, but we're not objects. We're human beings. We depend on the novelty and wonder of a new moment. We need variety to experience the varied parts of life and ourselves. We need human connection. Our tradition comes to our rescue in the verses we just read in the story of the creation of Shabbat. I'd like to look closely together at the 4 key verbs that narrate what God does. First, Vayachal Elohim, and God completed by Yom HaShvi'i, Malachto Asher Asa. Second, Vayishbot, and God ceased by Yom HaShvi'i, B'kol Malachto Asher Asa. Third, Vayavarach Elohim, and God blessed at Yom HaShvi'i. Lastly, Vayikadesh Oto, and God hallowed it. What are these 4 verbs showing us about the essence of Shabbat? The first, Vayachal, and God completed, focuses on the work of creation, now complete. But Vayishbot, and God ceased, shifts the focus from the work to God as the one who did it and who is now doing something completely different, setting tasks aside. Vayachal ends the work week, but Vayishbot begins Shabbat. It's when we consciously choose to set other things aside, that's when Shabbat begins. That is when we Shabbatify ourselves. After all, Vayishbot is the source of the very word Shabbat. Then come Vayavarach and Vayikadesh, and God blessed and hallowed. These words indicate, firstly, that this day is different. Other days don't have these qualities, but not different in a bland way. God did not just distinguish Shabbat, but blessed and hallowed it. These are words that elevate. They open our eyes to awe. So Shabbat is not only a day that's different, but also a day that's richer, a day that's deeper. The very fact that we get not 1 but 2 verbs for God's sanctifying Shabbat attests to Shabbat's doubled, extra bounty. So we see 3 core concepts of Shabbat. In Vayishbot, we see the concept of muktzeh, what gets set aside, literally put at the katzeh, the edge. In Vayavarach and Vayikadesh, we see 2 more concepts, shinui, difference, and yeterah, extra or additional, as in the classic expression treasured by sages like Ramban, nefesh yeterah, or neshama yeterah, an additional soul, a deeper state of being on Shabbat. what makes these concepts so significant for the time of COVID is that these are things that can be done anywhere. There's no physical requirement to be in temple or even leave home in order to make Shabbat a different day and a deeper day and to set other things aside for the day. And when we do these three things, what's the result? A distinctive experience, a singular state of mind. And states of mind and experiences too can happen anywhere. In her 1967 poem, Ner Shel Shabbat, Zelda writes, Nitzotzot haner hechalot, uvetoch hahechalot, imahot sharot lashamayim, ad sof hadorot. Dr. Zeeler's translation in My People's Prayer Book, the gleam of the candle, temples, and inside the temples, mothers singing to the skies until the end of time. What the speaker of Zelda's poem evokes is an entire experience, a Shabbat state of mind. The temple, where we can no longer go not because of COVID, but because the building itself no longer stands. All the mothers from throughout Jewish history together, a scene not even physically possible. And yet that is the state of mind that the speaker enters into as soon as she lights the candles and covers her eyes and says the bracha. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel indelibly called Shabbat a palace in time. With his classic phrase as inspiration, I might call Shabbat a palace in the mind. The living we do within the time we have and the internal landscape we inhabit during that time. This is where Shabbat resides. And you don't have to go anywhere to get to this land. Our tradition gives us tools. It gives us things we can do to face a time like the time of COVID. These things can be large or small because even a gesture can create a state of mind. And for us as Reform Jews living by the principle of choice through knowledge, we have an amazing opportunity, millennia of the back catalog of the record shop of Jewish history, all the traditions of those who came before us, all the practices of halacha that we inherit as we choose, as we create what we do to bring Jewish values to life. And it's unique for each of us. The design of this palace in the mind will be different in each mind. Legendary HUC professor Rabbi Eugene Borowitz of blessed memory taught that God wants each of us to fulfill the common duty of all Israel as just the me I am. So I'd like to share with you some of the traditions and practices I choose that make a difference in my life. I've been on a journey, growing up in the conservative movement, then spending 7 years in modern Orthodoxy and beginning rabbinical school in that world before crossing the Jordan into Reform Judaism. I saw that Reform Judaism espouses a big tent approach, and ma tovu, how goodly is this big tent. Now that the tool of choice through knowledge is one that I too hold, I'd like to share with you some of the ways I personally use it to construct the palace of a Reform Shabbat in my mind. First, Yeterah, a day that's deeper. One Yeterah practice that I choose is wearing white on Shabbat. I hang up whatever I was wearing before, busy with pattern and design as a weekday. And I put on a color that's as clear and clean as an empty inbox. Just knowing I'm putting on these clothes for the purpose of entering Shabbat, that itself ushers me into Shabbat. Second, Shinui, a day that's different. I love the way halachic tradition interacts with how the human mind works. I remember being intrigued to learn about shinui's specific meaning in halacha, that sometimes an act that's traditionally prohibited on Shabbat can become permissible if done with a shinui, if done differently, like carrying something ki la'achar yad, with a different hand grip than usual. The Mishnah gives a fascinating reason why. Shelo hotzi kederech hamotziin, because the person did not carry it the way people usually carry. A plain, homespun factor, just doing it a different way. And in that simplicity lies a spiritual wellspring. Simply making the typical different can turn the workaday restful and the routine sacred. What's more routine than waking up to an alarm? So I do it with a modern shinui. On weekdays, I wake up to this. It wakes me up. It gets the job done. But it's also the sound of hustling into another regular day's labors. So on Shabbat, I wake up to this. The moment I hear these different sounds, gentler, calmer, sunnier, I wake up and hear the presence of Shabbat. My bedroom is the same, yet my eyes and state of mind have opened to something different. And muktzeh, or in Yiddish and Ashkenazi pronunciation, muktzah, what gets set aside? Again, I love the partnership of halacha and psychology. There's the traditional halachic practice. The things that are not to be used on Shabbat are muktzeh, and thus prohibited to move during Shabbat, from coins and wallets to hammers and nails. And so too, there's the phenomenon that when we pick things up, we may be picking up more weight than we realize. For me, maybe it was learning the feeling of just picking up a bill to get ready to pay it. Maybe it was my first year of law school, as I made choices about what to read when. Trust me, first year of law school, you have no problem telling the difference between reading for work and reading for pleasure. Just picking up one of my books for contracts or torts felt like work. Bit by bit, I found a deep appreciation for a day when we get to choose the things we do and don't pick up, rather than the things choosing us. When we can sideline things that are too often present, and thus make present things that are too often sidelined. I remember one day at my previous rabbinical school, learning that in Orthodoxy, it's considered prohibited work to tear open an envelope on Shabbat. So all envelopes are muktzah. What I kept thinking was that before I made a choice about what to do with an envelope on Shabbat, I'd want to know what was inside the envelope. If it were a letter from a friend, then the experience of reading it would be deeply Shabbistic. If it were a bank statement or a credit card bill, then I would seek to make that experience muktzeh on Shabbat, but not because of tearing the envelope, because of reading what's in it. Sure enough, not long after I started at HUC, one Shabbat, I opened my mailbox and discovered a letter from one of my closest friends. I felt glee in my bones as I opened the envelope, feeling as if my buddy himself were stepping out of the envelope to spend Shabbat with me. When we choose our muktzeh, when we set bank statements out of bounds, what then is in bounds? Human connection and the feeling of sacred spirit. What we tune out makes possible what we tune into. And if we can't do it face to face, well, That's why God invented Zoom, and normal face-to-face days will come back. For me, practices like these construct a palace in my mind. They place me in a state of awareness where billowing in like the spring's first sunlight is God's presence in this world. And I feel in awe and grateful and joyful for the gift of that divine presence and company and love. And for my congregant who said, every day is the same now, except Shabbat, he found his shinui when he logged on to Shabbat morning services. He designated his muktzeh when he set his focus on our conversation and then services and tuned out all else. And from the wry, bemused, almost laughing way that he said it, every day is the same now, except Shabbat. It seemed he found genuine gladness in coming. If that's not Yeterah, what is? The same thing that makes Reform choice through knowledge unique to each of us, it also makes it hard. Choices are hard. Not being sure what to do is hard. It's less like a script and more like improv. I believe Reform Judaism teaches that that's part of the messy, holy project of living as humans in partnership with God. And we don't do it alone. Jewish tradition gives us a language. Then each of us speaks, and we gather to speak together. Shabbat is tailor-made for the era of COVID. And yet, every era is a good time to build palaces in our minds. Holy, light-filled places made up of the humble bricks of the things we do and don't do, the things we talk about and don't talk about. Judaism does not live only in physical temples. Judaism offers tools for making any home a temple. If we can empower our congregants more than ever to build palaces of Shabbat in their minds and their homes, not just now, but after COVID, then we will have contributed to the ultimate wonder of Shabbat, not the seventh day, but the 14th day and the 21st and onward, rippling out into more and more people's lives and further weeks and years. We will have participated in God's next regularly scheduled miracle. Boker Tov, and looking ahead, Shabbat Shalom.